Okay, André Le Notre, happy birthday to you, André. 1613, 1700. So he lived a long life, and he enjoyed the appreciation of maybe the most powerful king in France ever, Louis le Soleil, Louis the Sun King. Uh, I thought, I downloaded an engraving, an etching with a portrait of André Le Notre, and sometimes I like to keep the first downloading without adjusting the picture because I welcome accidents. And I thought, I mean, you see part of his wig, and I wonder, what if we were, I mean, not the women, not the ladies, not the girls, but the men to wear wigs again. I wonder what that would mean. Some people still wear them, and maybe I need one too. But I'm talking about this kind of wig because, in a way, it's the vegetation of the head. No, it's the uh, so I like to think that maybe, I mean, at that time everybody had, I don't know about the peasants, but the noblemen, the aristocrats, the kings had wigs. But maybe, the wig invites one to reconsider a relationship with reality. And maybe wearing a wig, I'm referring to the male architects, would make them reluctant to indulge in excessive minimalism or the dry functionalism and so on, because the wig is baroque. It is as it is anyway. So this was the man seen probably some years after he died. You will see also a painting with his portrait. He was very important in the French culture because he was the gardener of Louis Le Soleil, and he did some very important works. And you are going to see them one by one. So, André Le Notre, you see, he was born March the 12th in 1613, and he died in 1700. Originally rendered as André Le Notre with an S, was a French landscape architect and the principal gardener of King Louis XIV of France. Louis XIV was also called and is called the Sun King, Louis Le Soleil. He was the landscape architect who designed the gardens of the Palace of Versailles, and his work represents the height of the French formal garden style, or jardin à la française. Prior to working on Versailles, Le Notre collaborated with Louis Le Vaux and Charles Le Brun on the park at Vaux-le-Vicomte. His other works include the design of gardens and parks at Chantilly, Fontainebleau, Saint-Cloud, and Saint-Germain. His contribution to planning was also significant. At the Tuileries, he extended the westward vista, which later became the Avenue of the Champs-Élysées and comprised the Axe Historique. Yeah, so this is the man. Look at him. It's possible the engraving was made, from looking at the painting. I mean, the engraver looked at the painting, and he does look now like a successful person, of course. And what can I say? That the world changed, Can you imagine Frank Gehry looking today kind of like this? No way. And maybe that's a good thing he doesn't. Anyway, here is a portrait, a sculpted portrait of him at the Jardin des Tuileries, the Tuileries Gardens. And so what institution would order, would commission a sculptor to create the portrait of a gardener today? They don't do it even for architects, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm referring to the sculpted architects. Here is a list of principal gardens, and you are going to see most of them, if not all of them. the gardens of Versailles, the gardens of Vaux-le-Vicomte, the gardens of Château de Saint-Germain-en-Laye, gardens of Château de Saint-Cloud. The Château no longer stands, but the garden still exists. Gardens of Palais de Tuileries, gardens of Château de Sceaux, gardens of Château de Fontainebleau, gardens of Château de Chantilly, gardens of Château de Bercy, gardens of Château de Chambonas, gardens of Château d'Issy. And we'll go one by one, so it will be a rather comprehensive presentation on the work of this very, very important landscape architect. I begin at first, which I just announce in a way the larger themes, and then I develop them. Vaux-le-Vicomte. Now, André Notre was exceptional in his understanding of, in a way, the spirit of his time, and he had the means to express what he understood, because he was backed, so to speak, or supported and liked by the very powerful people of his time. Most of his parks are wide and large and long. They are very ample, and I would say that André Notre had an aspiration kind of similar in the field of architecture with Louis Kahns, because I think he aspired towards the immeasurable, towards the infinite, and he expressed this through his designs very eloquently. Versailles, but we'll analyze we'll look at Versailles with a lot of pictures. It's very interesting, the site plan, you know. I mean, look at these diagonals. I think they are very modern. They are very vital. There is a verve in them. And yes, a park shouldn't be just you know, banal alignment of trees. It is a creation. If you know how to work with natural entities or elements, and you should know how to, because if you are an architect, you know, it doesn't really matter so much. I mean, of course, there are specificities or differences, but, you know, if you know how to compose, you know, buildings, functions, you work with bricks and what other materials, you should be able also to create compositions that are engaging and interesting, inciting, inspiring, with bushes, trees, pathways, alleys, fountains, sculptures, and so on. But the plan at Versailles is impressive. I mean, just this almost cosmic vision that he had there. And I went there 2 or 3 times, and every time I spent a lot of hours wandering through the gardens, and I never entered the chateau, the castle, because I don't like chateaus in general. Plus the gardens were magnificent. But we'll come back to Versailles later on. Chantilly, this also had an impressive garden or landscape design by André Notre. Gardens of Château d'Issy. Now this one I think was demolished or severely affected by I don't know. I only saw pictures like this, old pictures, and not much of the garden. I imagine it doesn't exist any longer, but I like these pictures, and this is why I display them here. In a way, this is the destiny of a building, you know, we want it or not, and of course we don't want it, but you know, the fatality of time and the fatality of human aggression and the fatality of the workings of fate sometimes brings even the most noble work to such a state. Still, those who like ruins still appreciate what remains from once a noble work. Now we have virtual visions of what once was. The gardens of André Notre were highly formalized gardens. And it's a significant difference between French landscape design and let's say British landscape design. The British landscape design is informal. It advocates spontaneity, accidental interventions. It's romantically ungeometrized, so to speak. But the French design is very geometrical, and it's very interesting because the French are Latins and the British are not. But in the field of gardens, the British seem to be Latin, so to speak Latin, and the French seem to be not. Anyway, but maybe also there is a relationship between the flamboyance sometimes of the landscape design and the clothing. If we wear modern clothing, like jeans and the t-shirt, maybe although through contrast we could create a work that is highly exuberant, so to speak, both in terms of landscape architecture or in terms of architecture per se or buildings. Essentially, these gardens were, rugs, green rugs. I say green, not necessarily in terms of the specific color, but in terms of using natural material to draw them. The gardens of Château de Chambonas, here I don't have too many pictures, or I do. No, I don't think I do, but it's in all his designs. André Notre actually uses symmetry, but it's not a deadly symmetry. It is not a symmetry that is rigid. It's a symmetry that has betrayals. And I always say that a diagonal does a very good job at betraying, otherwise a static symmetry. Gardens of Château de Bercy. This one, the castle doesn't exist any longer, and the gardens had been destroyed as well. Once it was a magnificent landscape, as you can see here. And usually André Notre, this is how he worked, with very large vistas. And of course, you could say from the perspective of today, wait a minute, this is not democratic. We don't have all the earth at our disposal for just a few people. It's true. But at that time, it was a different conception, and there weren't so many people in the world as we have today. At that time also, there was no contemplating going to Mars or Moon as now it is. The gardens of Château de Chantilly, now I go more in detail. I already announced this major work by him, and it is indeed a major work, not just in terms of landscape design, but also in terms of architecture. The chateau itself, the castle is magnificent. But for this presentation, we'll look more at the garden. Now, what do we see here? We see the same way of working. It's this aspiration to the horizontal infinity, if I can call it so. It is as if the earth was flat and yet infinite. And André Notre wanted the inhabitants of the chateau to expand their view forever. This you could call it in a certain way some kind of a megalomania, no, because of the wideness of the space used. But on the other hand, looking at the castle, which was a castle, not a little studio in a little apartment building, it was a castle. But still, somehow, in the context of this wide landscape, it appears less important somehow. The landscape has the upper hand. This is what I'm trying to say. Nature has the upper hand. Thanks to André Notre, nature regained its supremacy. And even if the castle is impressive when you are in its proximity, when you consider the vastness of the landscape, by comparison, the castle becomes not pale and not totally insignificant, but somehow recedes in the background. And this is the power of the gardener. In a way, the gardener had the last word, so to speak. Yes, the castle is impressive as well, but because of these large areas with water and the vastness of the landscape and the way he designed things, somehow you have the feeling, as I said, that nature has the upper hand, as I think it should. Doesn't matter the splendors of the building itself. And the building is, to be appreciated. Of course, it is a good architecture, but still the landscape refers or points towards the infinite, while the building doesn't really. France is very rich in such landscapes and in such buildings. And tourism flourished until the pandemic came over us. Let's hope it will recede in some form. Unfortunately, it takes time. This dialogue between the landscape and what we call the landscape and the building is a fruitful one. They need each other somehow. Nature needs man. Well, it needed, or she needed, if we can call it, if we can call nature she. Maybe no. Maybe we should continue to call it it. It needed man, but I don't think lately it still does, because we abused our so-called power. You see, there is a strong geometry in his designs, but this strong geometry is not actually a sign of arrogance. It's, I think, a sign of his quest for the absolute, and he controls that quest towards the absolute through a very fine and precise geometry. Not always. You see, there are also accidents. I understood that this castle, there was also, or there is still an English garden, which has a different kind of landscaping. Gardens of Château de Fontainebleau, which I saw. By the way, if the pandemic goes away, and if you have a chance to travel to France, and if you go to Paris, if you can, and if you remember, please don't neglect to go to Lyon. It's not, I mean, we went by far with a few students in order to see in Lyon, you can see Monastère La Tourette by Le Corbusier, you can see Le Musée des Confluences by Kop Himmelblau, but on the way towards Lyon, moving south, you'll see Fontainebleau. And we came across it rather accidentally, but it was a magnificent experience, because it is so very peaceful to just walk through an Notre garden. I saw myself Versailles, Les Jardins des Tuileries, and Fontainebleau. And in all of them, maybe less in Paris at Les Jardins des Tuileries, because it was very crowded with the people going to the Louvre. But, at Fontainebleau and, at Versailles, it's very busy too now. In fact, so busy that when I went with a group of students from Bucharest 2 years ago, we couldn't even stay there, because there were maybe tens of thousands of people and buses, discharging continuously tourists from all over the world. But if you have the chance to wander through these large vistas and large spaces designed by André Le Notre, you arrive at a level of serenity which I think would have pleased even Louis Barragan. Of course, he uses a lot of space, as you can see. He didn't even cross his mind, to restrain himself. So in this sense, I say he was questing for the immeasurable. But in this case was maybe appropriate. It was the palace of a king or kings, and you know, a king is a king, a queen is a queen, and a prince is a prince. And how do you explain that although we arrived at democracy, no, we are still fascinated by princes, by queens and kings? I mean, where does the fascination with Prince Charles and Diana come from? Because we are supposed to be democratic, no? But even in the United States, which is supposed to be a democratic country, they are very, very fascinated with Prince Charles and you know, Diana, and now with their sons and their spouses. So this fascination, I think, it has to do with the fact that in our collective psychology, there is a mythical king and there is a mythical queen and there is a mythical prince and a mythical princess. They are there, and we cannot eliminate them, even if we arrive at so-called liberté, égalité, fraternité, meaning democracy. I'm sure, you know, any student in architecture learned about Fontainebleau. And it's not just the palace, but also the garden. They complement each other, and the gardens of Notre are magnificent. Now, the gardens of Château de Sceaux, uh, some of them either do not exist any longer or there were interventions, but all in all, we will go through approximately all the works done by André Le Notre. You notice how the trees are you know, clinically you know, geometrized. You know that this is typically French. You know, and you would say, wait a minute, isn't it an affront done to the trees? Are the trees happy about it? Well, I don't know. I didn't talk with the trees, but I think the effect is not unpleasant. You know, it's, you might say it's an abuse done to the trees, and in a way, maybe it is. But uh, I mean, this taming of nature, as it was called, in the context of the French culture, maybe it has some meaning. After all, Descartes was French, so Cartesian thinking, and maybe even, well, I don't know if there is such a thing as Cartesian feeling, but Cartesian thinking it feels at home in France. And it's kind of interesting. I don't know. I'm a little bit ambivalent, but I don't think aesthetically it is a failure. But this is a subject for discussion. We can debate. What about this way of controlling, taming nature? It's just a question that I launch. And I would be happy to talk with you about it. And I'm sure some of you might have very interesting ideas about this. Now, of course, it's not just about the design of the landscape, but also about maintaining it. It requires work. You know, you cannot expect a garden which was designed in a certain way 300 years ago or 250 years ago or whatever to look the same in the present. So it requires maintenance and knowledge and sensitivity. The Tuileries Gardens in Paris, they are associated, I mean, they are in the close proximity of the Louvre Museum. And if you walk towards the museum from Place de la Concorde, you cross the Tuileries Gardens. You see here, I mean, you can find plenty of pictures on the web about this famous garden. And unfortunately, the serenity that I mentioned before cannot really be achieved in Paris because, I mean, I don't know how it is now, but when the pandemic was not present, it was flooded with people. It didn't matter, winter, spring, summer, or fall, morning, noon, or evening, or even night, plenty of people. So in a way, the gardens of Tuileries, Jardin des Tuileries, is a little bit not deformed, but affected by the multitude of people, as you can see right here, as opposed to the gardens at Fontainebleau or Chantilly or Vaux-le-Vicomte. So what do we see here actually? Well, we see grass, we see trees, we see fountains, we see pieces of water, sometimes very large, other times less. We see sculptures, and they seem to coexist quite well, if not beautifully. I understood there are plans now to extend landscape design into Place de la Concorde and the Champs-Élysées, and because yes, all the world is needing badly reappraisal of nature, and we need the green badly. It is obvious when you consider just the tall buildings now being covered with green, now with the so-called vertical gardens or forests. So, you know, the Louvre is here, and then I think this is Rue Ravioli or Rivoli, and the always generous nature, which gives us so much and doesn't really ask for much, except a little bit of affection and some water. Otherwise, the modesty of plants, I think, should inspire us again, because just like the butterflies, the flowers are silently giving us a lot. And I think we can learn from the silent wisdom, which we do not have. I don't have it either. And yeah, there is a lot to learn from flowers and plants. This is the plan of Jardin des Tuileries. You see here on the left, Place de la Concorde. So if you want to go towards the Louvre, you'll go through, you know, from left to right all the way. You see Rue de Rivoli. And yes, what can I say? Paris is still a destination. Let's hope the pandemic will go away and we'll be able to visit these places, because there is much to learn, much to learn from a gardener like Andre Notre, or the architects of the Louvre, or the great artists who exhibit their works within the Louvre. So essentially, this picture is taken from Place de la Concorde, looking towards the Louvre. On the left is Rue de Rivoli, and so André Le Notre did this in terms of design, and then the architects worked on the museum itself. And on the right, you cannot see it here, but there is a great museum designed by, well, it was a railway station, Gare d'Orsay, but it was made, it became the Musée d'Orsay, and is d'Orsay, and it was designed by Olenti, a very talented Italian architect and designer. Why is it that our buildings very rarely achieve to inspire themselves from the beauty of flowers? Because when you look at these flowers, at these plants, and you look at the architectural works we do, we realize the distance. You know, you know, would you be happy with plants which are only white and black or gray? Nature without color is most depressing thing to imagine, and yet in some schools of architecture color is avoided as if it is a bad thing, but it's not at all. And it's not just about the color, but if you study, I mean, all important architects from Frank Lloyd Wright to Le Corbusier said the same thing: study nature, learn from nature, it will never betray you, using the words of Frank Lloyd Wright. And I think it's true. It is true. We can learn a lot from nature. Just trying to draw a plant or a flower, we can learn a lot from that flower or from that plant. Gardens of Château de Saint-Cloud. Again, we have geometry here. You know, look at these cones, green cones. But we also have an interesting, you know, the relief. There are steps here, stairs, and it's sometimes André Le Notre amplifies certain perceptions of the garden by I hope I have here a section, a longitudinal section through one of the parks, maybe this one. We'll see a little bit later. So you will see the sophistications of his vision, of his design. He wanted to direct the perceptions in a certain way, to amplify certain things or decrease the amplification for other things. It's a beautiful thing, actually, to do landscape architecture. And you realize when we look at the works of Teresa Möller from Chile, that you can be very, very creative and very, very contemporary, even avant-garde, by doing landscape architecture. And it can be very rewarding, no? I mean, you work with flowers, with trees, with fountains, with water, with the sky even. I think it's a beautiful preoccupation if you could work as a landscape designer. Here we see Tour Montparnasse, so it's not too far away from Paris, on a hill. But look what is going on here. You know, there is a lot of, you know, sculptural, you know, work. Taming nature. Yes, in a way, this is what it is about, taming nature. But paradoxically, sometimes by so-called taming nature, we actually amplify some of its virtues. Sometimes it depends on the skill of the designer. Gardens of Château de Saint-Germain-en-Laye. The chateau is itself a major work, but we see a difference in a way. I mean, these are the buildings. This is the landscape, which again points towards the infinite, as André Le Notre does. And also, when you think about it, you look at this with the eyes of a functionalist, and you would say, wait a minute, you know, where does this lead to? But do always things have to lead to something precise? Maybe the journey is the goal. In this case, you know, there is a certain, you know, you might say that there is a certain, not frivolousness, but, you know, the fact that there is such a long way from here to there, but there nothing happens, so to speak. I mean, we always, with our mentality today, we always want to have something to reach, like a target. And if there is no target, we see no value in the journey. But I think this obsession with the target is very problematic, because I do believe that the process is important, and as some people think, the journey is actually the process, the journey is actually the goal. I love these old engravings, these depictions of, now there is a difference between, the landscape design as expressed in the drawing and what was actually realized or built. Maybe Peter Eisenman was right. Maybe the drawings of a project are more architecture than the building made based on those drawings. It depends. But the drawings do have importance. I didn't yet meet anyone who said, I don't love flowers. Although I have to say, in the United States, paradoxically, there was a landscape architect, a lady from Harvard, who once gave a lecture named I Hate Nature. But I am sure deep down she actually loves nature. But sometimes the relationship between hate and love is very thin. Plus, she wanted to provoke with that poster that I saw, I'm sure. I mean, how could a landscape architect hate nature? But on the other hand, I remember Flaubert, the great French writer, hated himself and hating writing, hating himself for having to write, to labor every day, page after page after page. But he was actually in love with writing. So in the same way, I'm sure that landscape architect actually loved nature. But sometimes, you tell your beloved one, I feel like killing you. And it's actually a paradoxical, statement, because you actually love that someone. Like, or when you say to a child, or I feel like eating you up, although it's because there is a lot of affection toward that child. And, so the language sometimes could be misleading or paradoxically oriented. The gardens of Vaux-le-Vicomte, this one we are going to look at in more detail because it's a very important work. I mean, look at those Persian rugs done with vegetable material or with green material, and it's so rigorous, but at the same time so sensitive. The design is really. I don't know very well how to explain. When I look at this, I say, well, yes, here there is the work of man, but somehow it points towards something that it goes beyond man. As I said, I have a feeling that the gardener actually had the upper hand in the dialogue with the buildings. The castle itself is important, but so it's not just about dimensions, I think. It's also about the way he designed these alternations, pathways, then green spaces. Yes, it requires a lot of work to maintain them, but the general composition, the general work is one of that makes you, uplifts you. I think here I have a longitudinal section through the garden. And the water also brings a lot to the building. And the Chinese now in the present, in the 21st century, do this all the time. They obviously value, well, in Asia, in the Orient, there seems to be a more sensitive understanding of nature. Although not always. The same Chinese flatten mountains these days. But I have seen many buildings where there is water, large expanses of water in the proximity of the modern buildings, contemporary buildings. Château de Vaux-le-Vicomte, Jardin du Château de Vaux-le-Vicomte. And you see, again, the diagonals of Notre, which create a design which is dynamic, not static. What I see here also is, and I come back to it and I kind of repeat myself, is vita contemplativa, the contemplative life. Because then when you, for example, when you design this, it's, what is the functionalism of this really? What is the functionalism of the arabesques on a Persian rug? It's really about creating beauty, trying to create beauty. It's the same here or here. And there is a function in this beauty. It's not that this beauty is useless, not at all. It might be that it is the most functional because we need beauty maybe the most. Maybe Dostoevsky was right. Beauty will save the world. He didn't say the refrigerator will save the world. Of course, there were no refrigerators when he said that beauty will save the world. But our obsession with the parking lot and the refrigerator and the vacuum cleaner and the microwave, whatever, is a very vulgar obsession. You know, down if we consider things properly. Beauty should have the upper hand, always. That is, if you want to create an architecture, doesn't matter, landscape architecture or architecture which has a poetic value. If it doesn't have a poetic value, it will not be great. Frank Lloyd Wright was very correct when he said a great architect is a poet, is a great poet. Not in the sense that he or she writes poetry necessarily with words, although sometimes do, some do. But you write poetry with brick, with stone, with steel, even with concrete, with glass, with all the materials that architecture uses. Yes, you see here the section through the gardens of Chantilly. And so it is not a flat at all journey here. You descend and I read it. Actually, there are very interesting perceptions of the space because the architect created this artificial landscape. It's very possible that John Ruskin was right, that a great architect has to be a good or a great poet, a great painter or a great sculptor. If we can bring back our liking and our talent, our abilities for painting, for sculpting, meaning our artistic abilities into architecture, that would create an architecture that is more sensitive, more interesting, more engaging, more inciting, more inspiring, more beautiful. We shouldn't repress our artistic side because we repress our best side. And in the name of what? In the name of regulations, in the name of Ernest Neufert, in the name of the refrigerator and the parking lot and the vacuum cleaner, is not worth it. Really, it's not worth it. That's why I say to all the students, and I say the same to myself, the artistic side should be enhanced and always present. Because as Frank Lloyd Wright and Le Corbusier both said, and they were very different otherwise, but they both said the heart should come first and the brain afterwards. Well, the heart connects with the poetic side of architecture and the heart needs this poetry. The brain, I don't think is so, the brain can analyze, the brain can appreciate rationally certain things, but it is the heart that responds through the eye. Sometimes, yes, the relation between the eye and the heart is real, but I still think It is very, very, very important to enhance the artist in the architect as much as possible. And doesn't matter what the professor say, what Ernest Neufert says, what whoever says, the so-called client. No, the heart and the imagination and art should be manifesting itself. Otherwise, we are depriving ourselves of the joy of doing architecture. And without joy, what do we arrive at? Banality and even despair in the end. Now I know the functionalist will say, "Wait a minute, you are on a very dangerous ground here. We might lose the job. We lose the client. We infuriate the client. The client doesn't want beauty." It's not true. It is not true. Anyone who gives some money for something wants beauty too, I think, or should want beauty. I remember what Alvar Aalto said. Alvar Aalto said, we should give to the clients not what they want, but what they can't even imagine they could receive. Because the client doesn't really know. It is your role to engage the client into a conversation about loftier planes of manifesting your work in. And if you just let yourself be dwarfed by prosaic matters, then you will not arrive at architecture. I'm talking now mainly to the students, but I think this should be known by everybody. Our task is to create beauty. And if we don't create beauty, we don't really qualify for the word architect. Gardens of Versailles, and with this I will end the presentation on Notre, and then I will make a short presentation on Teresa Möller. But this will be a more ample presentation because this is, the Gardens of Versailles, because it is maybe his major work. Now, you saw already a graphic work with a large plan, and it is, indeed it is for Louis Le Soleil. Maybe some of you already saw Versailles, the Gardens of Versailles. What can I say? I saw it a few times, and every time I was so seduced by the gardens that it didn't even cross my mind to enter the castle, the Château. It is a great work. Yes, it was done for the king, but look, the king is gone a long time ago, and what we look at here is there are people from all over the world enjoying the work of André Le Notre. Could you have done such a work without being concerned with beauty? Impossible. This is really, it is ornamental work. It is decorative work. Why we totally banished ornament from architecture, I know. Because at the beginning of the 20th century, Orthodox modernists fought against the eclecticism of the 19th century. I understood. But things are different in the 21st century. And actually ornament is coming back, because you cannot just have structure, and again structure. We need the sensitivity of ornament, the sensitivity of decorative interventions. Even the capriciousness. Is nothing wrong to be capricious sometimes, at least sometimes. In music, there are capricious pieces. They are even called so, and they are magnificent. Because capriciousness sometimes has to do with vita contemplativa, with a contemplative life, with a quest for beauty. It's about this. It's about what you like. It's about desire. It's not about need. It's about desire. Louis Kahn very adequately differentiated between need and desire. And desire is the aspiration towards, loftier planes of existence. I am not saying that need shouldn't exist at all. No, it should. We have needs in life. It's true. But we shouldn't let the needs totally condition us. I think we can escape from the restrictions and create a more balanced life. Now, it is true, not everybody is a king, far from it. But beauty can be created, and you'll see the works of Teresa Müller, who, with a very different budget and with very different clients, did, and with a very different aesthetic, did something very interesting and valid. I mean, the gardens of Versailles are a universe in themselves. It is a collective work. He was the master, gardener, the master of this plan. But, many people contributed to the making of this garden, and many people contribute to the maintenance of this vast estate. What do we see here? We see here the will of the gardener, the will of the architect, but we also see grace. And I think any great work, any good work, creates a balance between will and grace. To express it differently, I use the word of a French critic, Boileau, who said, l'esprit de géométrie and l'esprit de finesse. L'esprit de géométrie et l'esprit de finesse. The spirit of geometry and the spirit of finery or fineness or finesse. You need both. If you have just geometry, you have just will. If you have just, the so-called l'esprit de finesse, you don't have enough structure. So you need the structure of geometry, and you see the more suave attributes of grace. And you need a balance between the two. And I think the best works in any field, not just architecture or design, in any field are a very harmonious balance, although sometimes there could be tension too, because you could have harmony through contrast. But you need both. You need structure and you need ornament. You need will and you need grace. You need geometry and you need the subtleties of that l'esprit de finesse. You need both. That's why I think a work which is obsessed with structure risks of losing a lot. Architecture is not just about structure. If it was just about structure, then, things would have been simple, but it's not. I mean, look at the sophistication of these designs, I mean, every square is different and complex and mysterious and maybe even abstruse, or, there is a knowledge here that is to be admired and studied. This is the palace, I mean, the castle, the Palace of Versailles, but the large vistas opened up by Notre, I think, are superior to this little building for the great Sun King. I mean, look, on this whole plan, this is the palace. Truly, Notre had the upper hand, obviously. Notre almost dwarfed, if I can say so, the little palace. In a way, the gardener dwarfs the king, because nature, I don't like to use the word dwarf, but maybe I should use it. Nature, we want it or not, has the upper hand. But here we also have the artists who have the upper hand, so to speak. They are present, they are necessary with the so-called useless fantasies or useless works, but they are not useless at all. We need beauty. We need sculptures, we need paintings, we need gardeners, we need architects, we need to be creative. You know, I keep saying it. It's known that, no, I should not repeat because I just said this the other day. I will say it again maybe tomorrow, but today I will not say it again. Well, I actually wanted to say, and now I'm contradicting myself because if God is creative, then the human being should be creative too, because it is said that the human being is created in resemblance to God, to the God. Well, if the God was creative and was, then the human being should be creative too. It's as simple as this. And if we are not creative, then we are betraying the very God who made us. Something with certain churches do not understand, it seems, especially in Southeast Europe. And it saddens me very much. Anyway, here we do see the artist in dialogue with the artist or the artist, the great artist, the creator of it all. And yes, it's about joy. Really, it's about joy. These fountains express joy. And without joy, what kind of art could you have? And without joy, what kind of beauty could we have? So I think this is, in a way, the goal, no? To bring in beauty, to bring in joy, although the road to them maybe it's not always light and easy and pleasant, but we should aspire towards joy. And when I contemplate the Ode to Joy by Beethoven, you know, that great music was born from suffering, but it became joy in the end. And I think this is the goal, in a way, to arrive at joy. I mean, in this work, of course, he didn't do these sculptures, André Le Notre himself, but he surrounded himself with great artists, sculptors, you know, craftsmen, and so on, and they together created what we see here. It's the tumultuousness of life. This is what we look at. We all live life in this way. It is a tumultuous one, and you know, this should be expressed, and it is expressed in this work. It is exuberance, really. It's about exuberance. And Frank Lloyd Wright was correct in creating an equality. He said creativity equals exuberance. So we should attempt to be exuberant too. Although when I presented some time ago, again, André Le Notre, maybe last year or 2 years ago, I commented on the fact that, you see, there is also cruelty. These two animals, one is defeated, the other one is defeating the one underneath. There is cruelty in nature, and you are going to see it here. And why did André Le Notre or the sculptor or both decided to not give the impression that life is just, or nature or beauty is just placid without cruelty? No, there is cruelty, and we on the walls of the Gothic cathedrals, the French Gothic cathedrals, and not just French, of course, there are depictions of the Last Judgment, and there are monsters, strange, grotesque animals. And so what I'm trying to say, life has everything. And if it is to be honored in its essence, we shouldn't hide anything. Like here, yes, there is cruelty. One animal kills the other one. And unfortunately, this extends also in the realm of human beings. It's something sad, yes, when you contemplate the face of this poor animal, but maybe there is some kind of a connection between what is sublime and what is cruel. This is a difficult subject, and I'm not going to go into it because I will fail. But I invite to reflection. Why did André Le Notre decided to have such a sculptural work in his garden, which shows conflict and tragic conflict? But like in love, Eros and Thanatos complement each other, love and death. And that's what we see here as well. There is a quest for beauty, but there is a quest for truth. And truth sometimes is visceral and is even tragic. There is a struggle. There is a struggle in life and there is a struggle in nature. The big fish eats the small fish. And the wolf eats the deer. And yes, it seems unjust. It is unjust, but it seems the Creator made things in this way. This doesn't mean that at the level of human affairs we should, indulge in, laissez-faire and be. Sorry, I did something terrible here. I'm sorry. I by mistake I touched a button which I should not have. I think I was here. Okay. We are approaching the end. The trees are also beautiful in this park and in these gardens. And I would say it again: try as much as possible to defend the trees. We need the trees badly, and not just because of the oxygen they give us. We need them badly. And in my opinion, is the trees are not as soulless as we might think. They are silent, it's true. But anyway, I love trees. And what would the world be without trees? Now, I end the presentation on André Le Notre with the artist, with this Laurie Victor Kay, who did some interesting photographs with the trees of Versailles. I remember once I went to visit Villa Tivoli of Emperor Adrian near Rome, and on my way towards it, I had to cross I don't know if I can call it a garden. There were many olive trees, and I was so impressed by the olive trees that I photographed and filmed them for about 2 hours. I forgot about why I went there to see the building. It's something magical about the trees. And then in Rome, I had the feeling that the trees were seeing through me, that they had wisdom, and I think they had. And later I learned that the olive trees are some of the oldest trees in the world. They are very, very old. They have very, very, very long lives. Now, what would you say to a tree which is 1,000 years old? Or what do you expect from a tree around whom or around which so many things happened? I don't know. I think trees are magical, and I think it would be good if we rediscover mystical dialogue with them and feel for them, feel for the trees. In a way, this is the cathedral of nature. The avenue of trees, the same artist. It is, in a way, the cathedral of nature. At the top, the trees make the branches and the foliage unite, and they create a roofing. Look at them. It is a roofing, even without the leaves. It's still a very impressive edifice, if we can say so. Thank you. And now, quickly, if you want, I will show you the work of a very different landscape architect, a lady from Chile, and I think you'll enjoy her work. Teresa Müller. So she's a contemporary landscape designer or architect. She's a gardener, actually, but she does very creative work and very abstract. This is the Chilean landscape architect. I came first in contact with her work at the Venice Biennial that was directed by her countryman Aravena, and she exhibited some works there. And then I became interested in her work, and I created this short, rather short presentation. Teresa Müller, Unveiling the Landscape. What beautiful words, unveiling the landscape. It's almost like saying unveiling the soul of the landscape, you know, because just like Brancusi or Michelangelo thought of unveiling what was hidden within the rock, within the stone they were carving, here Teresa Müller is trying to unveil what is already in the landscape and just needs to be, deciphered or brought to life. It's like listening to the spirit of the place and bringing out its essence, its soul, if you want. You see here, it's just stone. She created these steps, and the path, it appears, it might appear to someone who is not very careful that, so what's so great about this? But I think, you know, it takes great sensitivity to make this stair in a certain way so it would not insult the stones on the left and on the right. It's a work of human will, yes, but it is done in a way that creates kind of some kind of a tension relationship between man, I mean the human being, and nature. I'm talking about the nature of Chile, the nature of her country, the nature of the place where she was working. You see here how she did this, you know, how she accommodated the presence of the existing stones, and at the same time she asserted her will, her abstract will. Now, the landscape architecture can be done in many ways. This is one way. There are many other ways. But what I'm trying to say is you can do landscape design creatively, in a modern way, in a contemporary way, and even a so-called avant-garde way. It's actually a very interesting task, how to design a landscape or how to design a garden. Luis Barragan, the great Mexican architect, also worked in the field of landscape architecture. And I think it can be very rewarding because it is about space, it is about light, it is about many things, it is complex. You see here the house, which she didn't do, the house was not designed by her, but she brought in what you see here, you know, the pathways, the stones, the demarcations with fragments of walls. We see again that stair that she built here. In a way, her work is about asserting the will of man, meaning her will, actually, the will of the landscape designer. But on the other hand, to allow the landscape to not lose its individuality and become kind of a partner with the work she created. This is not easy at all. You know, I mean, it would be much easier to just let nature manifest herself or itself, or the other way, to just follow your instincts for supremacy in a way, for advocating your own cause, the human cause, and neglect nature, but to create a balance between them. And you see here clearly anyone who would see this would realize that this stair was done by a human being. This is not done by the human being, but the two coexist. It's in a way some kind of harmony through contrast, but both entities are in a dynamic dialogue. I like movement. I like life, she said, Teresa Müller. We do too, Teresa. Look how she breaks here the steps with this flowing water. You know, it can be magical. Truly, landscape design could be very, very rewarding. Or look at these diagonals here that intersect with the spectators, the beautiful trees around. So we have two diagonals crossing each other under the eyes, so to speak, of the magnificent trees. Now you see, this work is very different from the work of André Le Notre because we are in the 21st century. But still, I think I like to imagine that André Le Notre, if he saw this work, he would not have disliked it. What is the position of the human being in the universe? Well, we can debate forever about this, but I think it is important to ask the question, who are we? Where do we come from? Where are we going? These questions were addressed by Paul Gauguin, the great French painter. But we should ask these questions too. Who are we? Where do we come from? Where are we going? What does our gesture, constructive gesture, mean? Are we negotiating between nature and ourselves appropriately? There is something else also. We see here four men working to implement the design decisions of a woman, of a lady, of a woman landscape designer. I'm very happy this is happening. You know, it has been said that the 21st century is the century of women, and I believe it is true. Something like this would not have been easily seen in other centuries, but in our century, it is possible. And even the fact that the schools of architecture have more female students than male students says something. It is in a way the revenge of the road not taken, or the revenge of those who didn't have this possibility in the past. There is a lot to do still, and we need the sensitivity of women. We need their story being told, what they feel, what they imagine, what they think. And here we have such a case where a woman architect, landscape architect, is showing her intuitions, her sensitivity, her intelligence. And actually, in this presentation, I also had another work, but I should stop now because it could get too long. The work of a woman architect from Bangladesh, an excellent architect, who received the Aga Khan Prize for Architecture. this presentation was made 2 or 3 years ago. In the meantime, I'm sure she did other works. So if you are interested in her work, you can type in Teresa Möller, and I'm sure you'll see new works by her. Stone is beautiful. Maybe we should use stone again more. I love stone. Once I wrote a poem. I didn't memorize it, but the first two lines were like this: the stone again the stone waits again the true workers. Yes, the stone awaits again the true workers. It was actually the first line. Maybe one day I will read you the whole. It's not a long one, but. Teresa Möller and the Stones of Chile. I like this conjunction and disjunction at the same time, the work of Teresa Möller and the work of Notre in close proximity and tension. I mean, even this slit here, this rift, was created by her. I don't know exactly for what reason, but this is the will of the human being. And you could say, wait a minute, is it needed? Maybe there was. I like to imagine, because she didn't do superficial. I think it's here, it's not vertical. I don't know, but she is here at the Venice Biennial. Some years ago, when Aravena was the director of the Venice Biennial. But one thing is for sure: we need the sensitivity of women. We need their story, so to speak, because I think it is a little bit different from the story of man. We had enough time to tell our story, but I think in the field of creativity, the women are not yet completely and legitimately here, so to speak, yet. I like this picture very much. You see the landscape, and then the intervention of the, I don't know, it's something interesting, because it is really about artistry and sensitivity and emotion. Okay, I stop here now. I will not show you the work of the Bangladesh architect, maybe with another occasion. So I thank you for your presence today, and it happens that there are only